you a simple idea that you can take away and meditate on over the next couple of days. But at the corner of our stage, you see that we have a tomb that is set up as an attempt to reflect the events of the day. There is no body in the tomb, and we have lit it to represent the resurrection. Now, as the children have pointed out, there are 2 pieces of linen in the tomb. In the Gospel of John, there's a curious detail about the events following Jesus' resurrection. And for those of you that want to look at it closely, you can turn to John chapter 20. But in you don't have to, but in John chapter 20, Mary Magdalene sees that the tomb is empty, and she hurries to inform Peter and another disciple, presumably John, and when she gives them the news, these 2 disciples, they run to the tomb. Now, when the first disciple, it's like a bit of a running race, they hurried off, but the other disciple gets to the tomb first, and he pauses outside. But what does Peter do? Peter runs straight into the tomb, typical Peter. But Peter enters the tomb, and in John 20, we see that he saw the burial clothes lying there in strips, including the cloth or the napkin that covered Jesus' head. So what we've done in our tomb this morning is that we don't have the Shroud of Turin in there, for those of you that know what that is, but we have one folded piece to represent all of the strips that the disciples saw, and then we have a smaller piece to represent the napkin that Jesus pulled off his head. Now, the interesting thing about the napkin that was on Jesus' head is that the text tells us that it was rolled, or some say folded, and put in a separate place from the other parts. And you go, well, so what? Who cares? And you think, well, actually, this might seem like a minor detail in the text. But within the Jewish world, it was hugely significant. Let me explain. In the ancient Near East, when a servant prepared the dining table for his master, he would stand discreetly to the side, out of the master's view, but paying extra attention to the progression of the meal. After the master finished eating, he would rise, he would clean his fingers, he would clean his mouth and his beard with the napkin. It was a tradition. Now, this is where it gets exciting. If the master intended to return, he would crease the napkin into folds or roll it, and he would leave it on the table beside the dishes, and then he would leave. So this action conveyed his intent to the servant. So the 2 didn't interact, but it was his way of going, in the words of Arnold, I'll be back. Right? I'm not finished yet. I will return. However, if the master had no intent of returning, he would simply just crumple the napkin up and chuck it on the table, or drop it on the floor, signifying that he had completed his meal and he would not be back. Now, I find it interesting that when Jesus rose from the dead, he left the face cloth that covered his head rolled up or folded in some translations and separated from the rest of his burial clothes. In fact, commentators will say that this was done intentionally and it was done in a timely manner. In other words, it wasn't an accident, it was well thought through by Jesus. So this act, theologians believe, it symbolises the promise of his return. And of course, I find it interesting that this detail is picked up in the book of John, the book of John ends with the promise of the return of Jesus, and then John is the one that also goes and has the vision of what would become the book of Revelation. So just as a master in the ancient Near East would fold his napkin at the meal table to indicate to his servants his imminent return, Jesus assures us that he has not left us permanently. And the words of Jesus echoed this assurance. In John 14:27-28, it says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You heard me tell you, I am going away and I will come back to you." In essence, the folded face cloth in the empty tomb serves as a powerful message. Jesus had conquered death, and his departure was temporary. He will indeed return just as he promised. And I find it interesting that when you look at what happens around the time Jesus returns, it seems that it will start with a big banquet meal. There's a meal in Scripture it's called the marriage supper of the Lamb. So, SAJ family, the thought I'd like you to leave here with today is as follows. We serve Jesus, our Messiah, who not only died and conquered death, but we also serve a Messiah who will return. So that looking at the tomb, it's almost like the end of part one, right? When we look at the tomb with the folded clothing, it's a reminder to us as we live every day that we serve Jesus, who is not only with us now, but will one day arrive in fullness. So the main thing for each of us this morning is this: are we remaining ready and watching for his return? Are you at peace with this? And for the kids in the room, it's a simple idea. Have you decided to follow Jesus? Because we have our children with us today, I am just going to pray, and then the worship team can come and lead us with our final song. But as I say, as you go today, my invitation to you all is to think about, we struggle in our day-to-day lives sometimes, or life might be going well, but am I living my life with the idea that Jesus might come back today? And it's this balance, of going, yes, he might be back tonight, but he might not be back in our lifetimes. And we need to live with that tension.